Wow.
Wow. Well, Bill, you said you'd get some friends together for my birthday, but this is amazing.
I know, it's sensational. What a turnout. And thank you to Kay for lending her our home just for the last 3 days for this big party. Thank you, Kay. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.
Okay, let's get on with it.
Okay, so what does it take to become a global leader? What kind of man or woman can inspire different people from different cultures on different continents?
Well, here are 3 of my heroes. Martin Luther King, who simply wanted all people treated equally. John F. Kennedy, whose dream was to put a man on the moon within a decade, and he made it a reality. Nelson Mandela, for inspiring such worldwide support from his prison cell that first he and then his country were set free.
What each had in common was that they entered the hearts of people who were scared for their lives, doubtful of their ambitions, and opposed to their viewpoints. And they touched them enough to win their support. They had won over their hearts.
Well, hang on a second. Surely they'd won over their minds. It took more than emotion to put a man on the moon. It took logic, planning, and engineering. Mandela's transition to power required a whole new legal framework.
I agree. It was a battle for hearts and minds. Hearts alone would have left a logical vacuum. Minds alone, an emotional void. To be a global leader, whether in politics or Arbonne, you have to be able to win both hearts and minds.
So let's set out the skills required to become a global Arbonne leader, based on what we've learned in our lives and from the lives of others.
Well, in winning people's hearts, I learned from my counselling days with children that you must first listen to understand. Listen, understand, and then reflect back what you've heard. By listening, you're going to hear everything that you need to know about somebody's circumstances. And by reflecting back, you're going to gain their trust. Ask yourself all the time, am I simply hearing what somebody's saying, or am I really listening? Chances are, the people that you like the best will be the best listeners.
Well, the biggest lesson I've learned in appealing to people's minds is simply to keep it simple. By far the biggest reason that people walk away from this opportunity is we confuse them. It's really a simple business. Stop buying elsewhere, start buying Arbonne, and share with others. That's our business in 10 words. Why do we use thousands? We have to simplify the message. We have to interpret it before it's misinterpreted by others. With someone new to Arbonne, please forget about QVs and ENVPs. They'll run a mile believing it too complicated. Instead, speak in pictures. Tell your story, help others to describe their future. With your team, paint your vision. The future should be so bright, as Oprah Winfrey put it, that your eyes should burn.
Well, you might think it takes courage to stand up here, and you'd be right, it does. You might think I've always been courageous, and if that's your thinking, you'd be very wrong. When I started out in my chosen career of teaching, I struggled, not only because the boys in the class I was teaching were taller than me, but also because I lacked the courage to stand in front of a class of 7-year-olds and speak. So, it's true. I walked away from that particular dream because it was easier. And even when I went out socially with businessmen and businesswomen, I was crippled by the fear of what to talk about. And when I started out in Arbonne, I remember our first networking event that I attended with our daughter in Glasgow, now ENVP Emma Sangster, and we were both terrified to stand up and tell people what we did. However, courage means to move beyond your fear, to allow others to see your weaknesses, to learn from them, so that you can move forwards towards your dreams. So, in winning other people's hearts through courage, it often means first exposing your own vulnerabilities.
To win people's minds, you must remain reasonable, because reason wins every argument. Meet their problems with your solutions in positive language. If someone tells me, for example, that they are short of time, I tell them, well, I can help them rediscover time. They say, surely it's those who got in first who are the real winners. I say, well, in Arbonne, the people who've yet to start can become the top earners. They say their friends may think they've lost the plot. I ask if their friends are willing to pay their mortgage or their rent. One definition I love of success is it's getting up one more time than you've been knocked down. That's what we have to do when we overcome objections.
When our first daughter was born, like any new mum, I wanted to be sure that I would be able to support her for the rest of her life. But, support isn't something that you learn. It's something that you practice. So as Victoria, Emma, and our son Andrew grew up, I learned that the best thing you can do as a parent is to support your children's dreams. I decided that I would support our young family to achieve their goals wherever it took them. And it's just the same in Arbonne. You'll get the best results by supporting your team towards their own unique brand of success. Each path will go in a different direction. It'll be a different length. It'll be a different speed limit. But if we're going to be a truly supportive leader, we will recognize that each of these paths is absolutely the right one to take.
If you want to win over people's minds, then do things that make perfect sense. For example, I was invited to run communication seminars in Australia last year. Now, my good friend and new Arbonne area manager, Andy Fell, well done, Andy, was the general manager of a large retail bank there with offices in Perth, Canberra, Sydney, and Brisbane. Last year, we created a 3-week grand Arbonne tour of Australia, hosting Arbonne DAs in all these cities, getting in front of 800 people during February, strengthening our existing team there, and sponsoring in Perth and Brisbane. Now, yes, we traveled to the other side of the world to build our business, but I was going there in business anyway. It was logical to tie the two missions into one. Now we do as many Skype calls with our Australian team as with other parts of the UK. So I suggest that you put great planning into your Arbonne business to integrate it with everything else you're doing anyway. It makes perfect sense.
But you have to take risks. ENVP Sue Cassidy took the risk when she jumped on several aeroplanes, taking her from Fort Lauderdale in Florida to Glasgow in Scotland in January 2008 to visit me. Now, I was a new consultant, a brand new consultant, and Sue was an area manager. But she was determined to build her global business, and her heart told her that that was the way to do it, even if her head questioned that it really made financial sense. But if you want to build a global business, you often have to take that leap of faith.
And how was Sue rewarded? Well, through Caroline, she built an amazing business in the UK, which then gave her fresh energy to build new momentum in Canada. The success in Canada encouraged Sue to go to Poland to start building there. And all this time, her US and Australian businesses were growing, spurred on by the momentum created in each of her other businesses.
Now, there's a catch with being an Arbonne leader. You will be criticised. Criticised for what you know you could do better, but equally criticised for the things that you believe you're already doing well. But always remember, what other people think of you is actually none of your business. When I was 5 and starting off school, the teacher asked who could do a Scottish dance called the Highland Fling. I said I could, and went out in front of the class to show everyone. Well, later that evening, a family member found this hugely amusing and asked me to perform my Highland Fling in company. This remained, to my embarrassment, a source of amusement for many years, and may have resulted in my non-appearance on stage at my ballet show later that year, where I stood in the wings, terrified to go on and crying. Some years later, the same person criticised my piano playing, only commenting when I hit a wrong note. Almost 50 years later, I still refuse to let anyone hear me play the piano. I remember also being told that I had such a squeaky voice that nobody would hear me speak.
Can you hear her? Good.
Well, I believed that that's why I wasn't going to be any good as a teacher. And if I'm truthful, I really believed it would stop me being a good Arbonne consultant as well. Because how could someone who couldn't even talk to a classroom of 7-year-olds ever stand up and talk to a room full of adults? But I've learned to accept criticism for what it's worth. I understand it's not usually even about me, but usually about something far more deep-rooted. But we should always remember that when we point our finger at someone else, 3 fingers are pointing back at ourselves. It's still a work in progress for me, but I'm getting better at handling criticism every single day. It's important to separate constructive criticism from destructive criticism. If it helps you get better, accept it, smile, and say thank you. If it makes you feel worse, learn from it, smile, and say thank you.
Now, when Caroline told me in the late 1970s that her voice was so high-pitched that it would not record, I just had to put that to the test. I played her back a secret recording. I'm sure it was days before she spoke to me again. But it recorded. Now, when I was 8, I started a new school. On day 1, my teacher told me, "You will be a failure like your brother." Now, he was my only teacher for the next 3 years, and the self-belief with which I had arrived was crushed out of me day after day. The result was that I worked harder and harder, but failed to get good grades because I believed that I would do poorly. So I worked harder yet. I strove even further. I left school at 16 and entered a career in journalism, determined to succeed. I finally quit journalism after doing news and sportscasting for 30 years on television, 10 with the BBC and 5 other TV channels. But I had to get out of an emotional rut and into a logical groove to enjoy my success. You see, it took me 20 years to work out that I had just spent 2 decades attempting to prove my teacher wrong. Since then, I've been looking to prove myself right. Now, any top sportsman or woman, thank you, any top sportsman or woman that I've ever interviewed, or any coach I've interviewed for television has told me the same truth. Those motivated by the joy of success will always run faster, leap further, jump higher than those motivated by the fear of failure. And I can tell you from personal experience just why. Because regardless of what you achieve, it's never enough. You'll always be shackled by self-doubt and that feeling of low self-worth until you begin to believe in yourself. And only when your self-belief begins to grow can you pass on that belief to other people to help them believe in themselves. Ironically, that bullying teacher shaped my life's work. But my logical brain says that's because it's the struggle against adversity that makes us the person that we become.
So what have I learned from my time with Arbonne so far? I've learned that trust is as important a tool in business as a contacts book. Without trusting Sue Cassidy, I would never have started my Arbonne business. It was trust that brought ERVP Leona Fell and ENVP Gordon Fraser into the business. And only because of my own trust in our founder, Peter Mork's vision, did I then bring my own daughter into Arbonne because I believed it would give her an amazing future. I've learned that although I didn't believe in myself at the beginning, other people did. And that developed into a self-belief that's consistently growing. I've learned that the person who said I wouldn't be good at anything was wrong. Because after immersing myself in charity fundraising for 15 years, I then threw myself at something amazing and watched it build from the ground up. And that, in 2008, although there were only 2 of us from our team waving UK flags at GTC, myself and ERVP Angela McVicker, just look how many there are now. asked if you can hear it down here. You really can. Thank you. This is what happens when spirited cells multiply. And when you have a collection of this number of brilliant minds and beautiful hearts, you can expect a masterpiece.
I once had the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Stephen Covey, the author of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Where does self-belief come from? I asked him. Almost always from others believing in you first, he replied. Like Caroline, I can relate to that. Mr. Yakubian was my math teacher in my final year at school when I was averaging scores of 30 to 40%. I know you worry about failing your exam, he told me, but will you work with me to achieve a pass? Of course I would, and I did pass. Now, as Arbonne consultants, we need to believe in ourselves and work hard to make sure we pass the test in front of us. These things are all logical, but our insecurities will blind us if we let them. Now, I have one further hero who appeals to both hearts and minds, and he did so in changing attitudes and, indeed, history itself, Mahatma Gandhi, a man who led India to independence through peaceful protest. And he said, "Be the change you want to see in the world." All of us need to be the leader, the stellar Arbonne consultant that we would wish to have in our own team, because our team will follow our example rather than our words.
So, who's the greatest hero that I've ever met? Well, the man whose knee I sat on when I was 5 years old, who dressed my doll for me and made me feel like the most important person in the world at that moment. Muhammad Ali, or Cassius Clay as he was known then, he believed he was the greatest, and then he later went on to prove it by becoming the best boxer that the world has ever seen. He predicted success, and he was usually right. We can all learn a lesson from that.
So in conclusion, let us ask you, are you willing to use your soul and your brain to appeal to people's hearts and minds?
What courage and commitment will you show when you fear what others will think or say?
Will you interpret this business simply before others misinterpret it?
Will you weave your other commitments around Arbonne to make them work together because it makes sense?
Will you travel to the other side of the world to build a better world for you, your family, and your team?
Are you prepared to be the change that you wish to see in the world?
And if you're willing to do all these things, then you will be an Arbonne global leader. Thank you very much.
Good morning.